And I was like, whoa. I was like, that's wild. I was like, a deer trusts his nose to such a degree to where he's willing, he knows that the open's not safe. So he's like, okay, he's like, I can sprint through this open safely and get, downwind of all that stuff safely. And I did not set up for that.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
I was not ready for that.
Well, let's get into the story of the old 9, which is actually a 10 point. But
Yeah.
I want to hear about that.
Yeah. So the 9, it's interesting to think about now because, having that deer on my wall, it not only represents, a deer and a challenge, but it also represents a decent percentage of my life, like in its total, like just because of all the work that I've done to put in for that deer, like it represents, a couple of years of my life, basically, sitting there on a wall, which is kind of crazy to think about.
Yeah.
But he checkmarked just a lot of boxes for me. I always, like I love going out and looking at tracks, and I've only in my entire time being out in the woods, I have seen like a legitimate, like for my hand, what, a 4-finger track, for
Mm-hmm.
my hand, I've only seen 2 ever tracks upon, I don't know how many tens of thousands of tracks that I've looked at over my
Yeah.
lifetime. I've seen 2, and he's got a 4-finger track. Whenever I held his hoof up and I laid 4 fingers across it, I was like, yeah, he check marked that box for me, like hard.
Yeah.
No, but that deer. So, and this is kind of a collective effort for me and some of my buddies from high school. They'll come up to where I live and they'll hunt with me sometimes. So, it just wasn't, my deer that I was chasing, because, they were chasing them, whenever they could, they were chasing them hard also. My buddy Jake, he got really close to killing them the year before. But whenever I first encountered this deer, we got a trail camera picture of him, and it was about an hour after dark, and just based on that picture, kind of the pace he was moving, the direction he was coming from, I kind of drew a couple lines and figured there might be this one point that he was living on and coming off of. And so I went in there and I started scouting up this creek bottom, and there's this point, the high part of the point is to the south, and then it slopes off to the north. We had a south wind that day, and I'm coming around the west side of it, so I'm working up the west side, really down low to the creek. And I noticed this rub line, which was funny enough, it was really low to the ground, but it was just shredded. And I'm just like, that's kind of interesting. I was like, I bet you that's a mature buck, whether it's the 9 or not. I don't know this for sure. But I followed it all the way up to where that thick stuff kind of met the open, and I was like, okay. There was like open right where I was, and then I guess if I went a little bit further to my east to the top of the point, the cover kept on going down another, 70, 80 yards. So I'm thinking, okay, this buck, he's going to be laying up here on this wind, and he's going to try to get downwind and come up this rub line that I just saw. And I'm like, okay, he's probably going to follow this line of cover, hopefully right up to me. And right where I was sitting, there was a decent rub cluster there, which was where he liked to hang out, check the wind, and make sure all of his bases were covered before he kept on moving. So I'm sitting there that evening, and I see him coming off the top of that point, going right down the top, just like I was kind of thinking. And this was one of the first times that I saw this, but he got out a little bit, past me. I guess he was to my northeast now, and he just stopped. And he stood there. And he stood there. And he stood there for like 15 minutes. And I'm just like, it was so cool to see, a whitetail. And at that time, I believed he was 5.5 years old. It was so cool to see, a deer that, well, what a deer, like to the extent of what a deer will go through if he's in a pressured environment, what exactly they will do. And so he just stood there, and he started looking my way, and he started turning his head. He'd kind of glare over in my direction, then he'd look back forward, and he'd glare over in my direction. I'm like, he's coming this way. And I'm sitting there, and I'm like, come on. I was like, just start moving. You want to come right up here to this rub cluster. The next move he did, I did not expect. I expected him to move up that line of cover and, kind of slowly and methodically. And instead of doing that from his cover to the little bit of cover that I was in, he had to cover, 80, or so yards of just open timber. He went from standing still, he turned and he sprinted through the open and ended up straight downwind of me. And he busted me. And I was like, whoa. I was like, that's wild. I was like, a deer trusts his nose to such a degree to where he's willing, he knows that the open's not safe. So he's like, okay. He's like, I can sprint through this open safely and get, downwind of all that stuff safely. And I did not set up for that.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
I was not ready for that. So he got 25, 30 yards downwind of me. The wind was kind of doing some odd stuff in there. So he started, doing some circles, and he stayed in a really, really little bubble until it got completely dark. And it was like a full moon that night. And then for 30 minutes after dark, this deer was just like doing one of these numbers, trying to get another whiff of me, trying to get downwind, and he never smelled me again. But then finally he left, and I was just like, man, I was like, I've got my hands full with this deer. And then at that point I was like way committed on that deer. I was like, I need to learn this whole place as thoroughly as I possibly can. So for 2 springs in a row, literally every spring outing that I went on was going in there. And even during, not even just the spring, summertime, if I had an opportunity to get out there and learn something more about that area, I did. And that's why I'm saying that deer, represents, a good part of my life, because it was just an effort, for that deer. Last season, I had 0 encounters with the 9. I never saw him. He was, 6.5 years old then, and he was basically just like a ghost. We had one daylight picture of him on camera last year. My buddy, like I said, he almost shot him during gun season. He was in the middle of just this just absolutely thick, nasty stuff, and had him at like 60 yards. I couldn't get a shot at him. But I remember one on a trail camera sequence that we had of that deer. He was following a hot doe in early December, And I looked back on those trail camera pictures, looked at the wind for that day, and you can see this deer. Here come the doe, and then here he come right behind her, and then he turned, walked away, and then came back. And I looked at the wind for that day. That buck left that hot doe to check the wind before they went and moved. And I was just like, man.
Yeah.
I was like, holy cow. I was like, yeah, this deer is truly on another level. And so, again, that next spring, I'm just going through and I'm learning, that entire environment. And I don't know exactly, how it is that it's going to go down for this deer. I'm looking for, rut funnels and whatnot that I could possibly, shoot him in the rut. I'm looking for other, situations that, I can get at him at other times of year. What ended up being the thing that got him killed was a little white oak grove that was sitting up right next to the bedding area is what ended up getting him killed. And that's what I was kind of talking about earlier, deer like a little small area.
Mm-hmm.
So this piece is kind of, well, I'm not going to say it's weird. It's weird to me, but these deer don't get in there until the acorns start falling, or whenever the rut kicks in. That's whenever other deer move in. But I was in there late September, and I was walking down this white oak flat, and I noticed a couple rubs that were opened up. They were tore up and they were low to the ground. And I was like, interesting. I was like, oh, we're gonna see what this is all about. And I'm pretty sure I learned this. I think it was I think Johnny said something about it. Whenever you're in an environment like that, like I planned on that first spot that I was hunting. It's not like deer do the same thing every single day. And so I'm like, even though it's early season, I'm going to set up in this spot for 3 days. And, to catch this buck, eventually coming in, he will eventually come in here. And on that third day, he came in. It was a 130-inch 8-pointer, or so. Not my target buck, so I gave him a pass, which is harder for me than what it might seem like. I was like, ooh, I was like, man, he looks good. I was like,
oh yeah, dude, I'd have trouble with that.
I was like, no. I was like, just calm down, Jace.
Yeah.
So I passed that deer, and it was a couple evenings later. I got off work late, and there's this giant bottom, and there's a ton of different, cedar grove, some other, high stem count, stuff, a ton of area where a deer could be laying. And there's patches of white oak groves up in there. I'm like, okay, I'm going to take the opportunity today to sneak down this creek bottom, be as quiet as I can, and just basically still hunt, this entire evening. And it was about 6 o'clock, and I get to the bottom of this ditch, and I look up the hill, and me and a buck, we lock eyes for just like a split second, and he goes running off. And whenever I see him go running off, I immediately knew. I was like, that was him. That was the 9. I was like, and he just showed me exactly where I'm going to kill him. And I'm like, brother, it's game on, because a big buck doesn't. This is something my dad taught me back in the day. A big buck doesn't do something for no reason. There is a very good reason why he's doing what he's doing. And a lot of times it has to do with the fact that he is, he's comfortable doing that. He's confident in doing that. And so knowing he's there for a reason. He's there because he wants to be there. I'm like, I can sneak up there tomorrow evening and and at least get really, really, really close to him. Because I knew that was, so that was a white oak grove that was just up next to this. I mean, just absolutely thick, nasty cedars. And I was like, um, because I've hunted deer on food a lot, I'm like, he's got to keep an eyeball on this white oak grove up there in his bed because he wants to, visually and audio, check all this out. Because he doesn't want to, be laying over on the next hill, not knowing exactly what's going on over here, then travel all this way to where he doesn't, he doesn't have tabs on things. I was
Yep.
like, so he's going to be keeping very good tabs on things. So the next day, I'm sitting there at work and I was listening to some, I think it was Bobby Worthington actually is who I was listening to. And he's kind of like a poem writer, but one of the things that he wrote that I posted on my story that day was, today I shall enter the woods to see what I could learn of the old buck or he of me. That was running through my brain all day long. I was just like, we're going to find out. I was like, I'm either going to learn about him or he's going to learn about me. It's going to be one of the two. And it was time for me to leave, and my boss was like, we got quite a bit of work to do, Jace. Do you really need to leave today? I was like, yes. I was like, I'm actually leaving right now. He's like, all right, all mad and whatnot. I was like, there's nothing I can do to help that. He's just got to get over it. So, so I left. I took off to the woods. It takes me roughly an hour to get in there. And I get up there, and those last 30 yards to the tree, that's like right where I'm up in his zone. That's whenever I started to get nervous. That's whenever the adrenaline started going up. Because all of a sudden I'm like eyeball level with this flat. And I'm like, he's laying somewhere, I mean, right here. And I'm just like, okay, one step at a time. I was like, we need to make it to the tree first. And so I made it to the tree, and I'm like, Jace, if you can make it up this tree silently, you'll kill this deer. And so, like I said, that next, 30 to 40 minutes going up that tree, I mean, adrenaline's just up here, and I'm just like, no noise, nothing at all, silently. I get up in my tree, made no noise, and I'm like, I think I did it. I was like, I think I actually got up in this tree without him, knowing about it. At 5:40 that evening, I hear something in the cedar trees about 60 yards away, and I hear antlers clicking off of branches coming down, and there's the first white oak tree that's right up next to the cedar patch, and and there's a little bit of wind, so I gave this deer the wind. My wind's about 30 yards off his nose the whole time. And I was like, okay, I can't really do anything right now. I know this is him. I know it is. I was like, here in about 20 more minutes, these thermals are going to switch and my thermals are going to start going down this ditch. I was like, I'm going to be aggressive with them. So I know like most of the deer in this area, and I know that he is the oldest, the biggest bodied, deer that is in his prime, and he's probably not going to tolerate another buck challenging him because at this point, at that point I thought he was like 60 to 70 yards away, honestly, whenever he was feeding underneath that tree. And I hadn't seen him at all at that point. And I was like, what does the guy do? I was like, I'm not going to bet on him just, waltzing over to me and me shooting him. I'm going to have to do something here. And so whenever those thermals started switching, it got like really quiet out there. And I was like, I was like, okay. I was like, I'm going to give him a little bit of snort wheeze, but I'm going to kind of face it this way really quiet just to see if he'll, maybe hear it. And I let out a little snort wheeze just with my mouth. And I waited probably, 7 or 8 minutes and nothing. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to give him one a little bit louder, direct it a little more at him. I'm not going to like blow his ears off, but I'm going to make sure he hears this one.
Yep.
And I snort wheeze again, and all of a sudden, all that sound that I was hearing, over there from him, feeding, walking around, and whatnot, it stopped. I was like, he heard that.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there, and then probably, 2-3 minutes goes by, and I see a body coming through the brush, coming towards me. And I put my binos up, look, I'm like, it took that much of a look. I was like, yep, that's him. And he's coming in, and he's coming in, I mean, slow, and he's looking, left and right. And while he's coming in, I don't know what he's about to do, but I go ahead and draw whenever he's about at 20 yards.
Mm-hmm.
And he stops at about 15, and he stands there. And I'm like, oh, fuck.
Yeah.
And this deer starts sniffing the ground. And this was another weird thing. I've never heard this amount of air go in and out of a deer. It was crazy hearing this deer smell. It sounded like an elephant that was breathing or something. Just like if there was like even one molecule of scent that was, going up towards him, he's going to get it. So I'm sitting there at full draw, and those same acorns that he was feeding on the evening before, he started feeding on those again. And he'll look up, kind of look around, and he'll go back to feeding. And I had one lane that was about 5 yards in front of him, but I had to hold that bow back for his 3.5 minutes. And whenever he started coming out into that little gap that I had, buddy, I'm telling you what, I was like literally starting to go blind because I was holding that bow back for so long. Well, I had my thumb on my neck, and I don't know if I was like cutting off blood circulation to my head or what, but things were getting blurry, like quick.
Yeah.
And so I put the pin on him, and I'm like, I was like, yeah, that top pin, it's in there. Let's go. And I shoot, and he runs up the hill, and I don't hear anything for a couple minutes. And I hear this gurgling, and then step, crack, step, crack, boom, and then nothing. And I'm just sitting there, and I'm just like, I know what that is, but I don't want to believe it.
Yeah.
I was like, and I had no service. I'm used to sharing these experiences, with my buddies. Like somebody's getting called, basically is immediately after I shoot one. I had no service. So I wasn't able to tell anybody at all for like 2 hours after I shot him. I was going crazy. My buddy Jake, I got a hold of him. He drove 3 hours all the way up to help us come recover that deer. But we went up there, and I thought he would have been around, like that 160-inch mark, like whenever I shot him. But whenever I walked up on him, I was floored with how big he was. I mean, he's just short of 170. I got him at 168.5. As you would say, not even 170.
Yeah, not even 170. Well, that was another one. You did the same thing, didn't you?
Yep.
You got to stop that, Jace. You
I know.
Let it grow a little bit.
I got an issue. I just need him to grow just a little bit more.
I forgot I said that.
Yeah, so this is another one. Not even 170.
All right, man. I think we're going to end this.
All right, next guest.
Hey guys, thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, share it with your buddies. Leave us a rating, a review, and subscribe. If you want to check out more content like this, there's plenty in the links below. We truly appreciate having you guys along with us.